Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to our virtual consultation for the Scoreboard, our self-assessment tool for the ITTEA. Uh, I hope you can all hear me very clearly. I will try and speak slowly since I have been told I speak too quickly, but if I speak too fast, please just wave your hands like this on your screen so I can see. I thank everybody for coming. And this session is recorded so that colleagues who are not able to make this call will hopefully be able to come back, watch it, and still provide feedback for us for the consultation. And I am very pleased that we are able to host this session in order to be able to hear from all of you on this tool that, we had a workshop in Cebu at the pre-MOP of the EAAFP, and I think that was a very fruitful way for all of us to meet in person and start this discussion to see the draft that Dingley and the folks at BirdLife have prepared for us. And hopefully today we can get more input to refine that for proper weighting, which Dingley and them will discuss later. And Mark, if you would like to say a few words of introduction for everybody.
Sure, thanks, Susan, and welcome everyone. My name's Mark Carey from the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water for the Australian Government, and I'm chair of the ITTEA. I'd like to open the meeting by thanking all of you in attendance today. Many of us on the call were recently in at CMS COP in Brazil, which you'll hear about a little bit later on in the meeting. I was particularly pleased with the decision to list a large number of seabirds on the appendices and a focus on marine flyways and some really important decisions on illegal and unsustainable taking of migratory species. Sorry. Sorry, I just got a frog in the throat. Susan will provide more of an update on those matters in the next agenda item. Today, our focus will be to discuss a number of important issues and follows on from our face-to-face meeting in Cebu in November. Today, we'll have a presentation covering bird hunting and the use of mist nets in Southeast Asia, the MIKT scoreboard and its use to assess progress on illegal taking of birds in the Mediterranean, and a discussion on a monitoring tool to assess action on illegal taking of birds in Southeast Asia. So I really encourage you to get involved and ask lots of questions. Your input is really important at this stage of the project. So with that, I welcome you to the meeting and I'll hand back to Susan for an update from the CMS Secretariat.
Great. So yes, I'm going to present first on some updates. So as Mark said, we were all just at COP and had a very fruitful meeting with a lot of updates related to birds. And so I will try to focus on avian species that are of particular interest to this region. But I encourage everybody to go check out the website for anything that I discuss and if they're interested in other species as well. All of the documents are online on the CMS website. There's a COP15 docs. When you open it, there are three tabs. One of them says documents. You click that and everything is listed there. And I will put the exact links to every single document I talked about today for your convenience also. But I do encourage you to look around there. The information documents page has a lot of really great reports that are in support of some of these taxa, some of which I will mention today. But if you are interested in other topics related to migratory species, I encourage you to check that out and encourage everybody to take a look at that. So one of the big things that were completed were these updates on the draft resolutions for flyways and for the seabirds and the marine flyways. Both of these, if you, as an example, for when you go on that COP webpage, you go to documents, on the first part where it has all the new CRPs, they are just listed in the order that they appear by the original document number. So, 26.3.1 is about halfway through the page, and you'll see it. You can just click it, it'll open it to all these pages, and these are linked individually here. But you can go read the updates. There are extensive updates, so I'm not going to go over the exact details for every single one since I want to try to keep this on time. But there are also some really big documents that I encourage folks to check out since there are annexes such as the Multi-Species Action Plan to conserve African, Eurasian, and Australian bustards from 2026 to 2037. is a very large document that is the annex to the original agenda item, and it's very detailed. It has a great page for each of the species, and it covers every single species of bustard. So if you're interested in bustards in any way, this is a great resource. I encourage people to share this with other folks that they know that work on bustards as a resource going forward, as a guide for people who are interested in that kind of work. It's very clearly laid out, and I think it's something that will be very useful to folks who are working on management who may need something as a quick reference also. Similarly, there's a global action plan for the conservation of the steppe eagle from 2026 to 2035. And the information document version of that, which I've linked here, is the nicely formatted version that has everything laid out in very nice, colorful tables. If you look at the earlier version, that was the annex. It's a completely Word document version. So I encourage you to check out the info document version since it's quite easy to understand. And it's very dense and has a lot of information. It's also, again, very good as guidance for people that are interested in these topics. And if Umberto, if you would like to mention anything specific to these raptor action plans at all, please feel free to interject at some point at any time, actually. But I do encourage people to check these out. They're very great resources, and people have spent a lot of work on them. And I do think that it will be very useful for planning going forward. And if you're interested in general with raptors and protecting raptors in this region, I think it's a very useful tool as to understand how you could create action plans for other tasks that might be of interest in your own countries that may not be recognized yet by CMS, but may need action plans like these as well. There are some new avian species listings, and for the gadfly petrels, they are on Appendix 1 and 2, and then Appendix 2 is the flesh-footed shearwater and the snowy owl. And there are obviously other avian taxa, like I mentioned, in the Americas that were covered, but I'm not going to cover them here. There are many sharks and other marine taxa that might be of interest to folks who are in this region also, so I encourage you to go on the website and look at what are the new listings for the appendices. And then there are concerted actions for the Antipodean albatross and the flesh-footed shearwater on Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 respectively, and those you can read more extensively on their documents also. The internationally important raptors area also has a CRP for it out. The list of sites itself, though, is actually in Table 3 of Annex 3 of the Raptors MOU. And that is something that you can find also linked on the website. And so I encourage you to check that out for what are originally the internationally important sites for migratory birds that were known for Eurasia that are of interest to you. And then now I would like to also very happily say that we are starting officially with our East Asian Australasian flyway situation analysis. I think I've briefly mentioned this a couple of times before that we were undertaking this endeavor this year, and we have finally have our consultants on board with us to assist with this task, and they will be leading this situation analysis. Thank you very much, the Government of Australia, for funding this. It's going to be a very important comprehensive analysis that will help give us a baseline for prioritizing migratory bird conservation actions and strengthening policy responses at all the different levels. It's in line with, multiple CMS resolutions that are very much going to hit at important aspects of our work also on ITB. So I'm going to kick it over to Sam to speak and introduce the team. Sam?
Thanks so much, Susan, and thank you, Mark. And hello, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for having me at your meeting today. So my name's Samantha Vine, and I'm head up a little consultancy called For Nature. And we're really thrilled to be able to be joining CMS for this situation analysis. So a little bit of history. I've worked at BirdLife Australia for about 14 years before heading out on my own. And as part of that, I was the Pacific rep on the BirdLife International board. And so basically I've had, pretty good oversight of what's been happening, not just in this flyway, but across many of the flyways across the globe. Really interested in migratory shorebird conservation, in particular that nexus between the sort of policies and strategies and different ways that we can evaluate and protect migratory shorebirds. In fact, I probably saw quite a few people that I haven't seen since at at the East Asian Australasian Flyway MOP that BirdLife co-hosted in Brisbane a few years ago. I'm going to be joined by Pepe Clark, who is, and I'm not sure if Pepe is on the call, who has also had some time at BirdLife International, as well as WWF and a lot of leadership positions across the NGO space, as well as a couple of colleagues that worked for me at BirdLife, Dr. Jenny Lau and Dr. Sarah Pearson. So that's the team that will be working on this. Next slide, please, Susan.
Maybe the project roadmap. Do you see that? Nope. Yeah, I'm just off the call. Oh, what happened there? Hold on a second. Did Sam just drop off the call? I can't see on where the.
I think she did.
Yeah, I think she did, huh? Okay, well, hopefully she can reconnect and she can. Oh no. Hopefully she can reconnect and give us a continuing discussion of the project roadmap. But I will continue forward. I'm going to give her a minute to try to maybe reconnect. And I'm going to press forward so we don't waste too much time, but hopefully she can reconnect because I would like for her to go over this. I can give a very quick overview. Maybe Sam can talk about it more extensively if she can reconnect again. But they're going to start with a literature review from April to June. And that will be going over the status, trends, threats. Oh, here she is. Sam, are you back? Are you able
I
to?
am back and
Okay.
clearly coming to you from Australia with very patchy internet. Sorry about that. Where did you get up to, Susan? Were you talking people through this one?
I clicked to the project roadmap slide and I had given a moment to pause to see if you would reconnect, and I had only just mentioned the literature review, so you can start off leading
Wonderful.
everybody through.
Apologies, everyone. Yeah, so obviously kicking off at the moment with the literature review, and we'll be looking at the status, trends, threats, and the policy and legislation around the flyway. We don't want to wait until that's done to talk to you guys, so we're really keen to start with a questionnaire and some semi-structured interviews where we'll be really trying to hear from people on the ground what the biggest concerns are, and getting together towards the end of July on a webinar to sort of discuss the key findings at that point and potentially where the biggest gaps are. So that we can do a bit more follow-up later on in the year to start to synthesize those findings and really test with you guys whether or not we're hitting the nail on the head in terms of the things we're starting to find by then. And then we'll be starting to draft out those key recommendations and have a final webinar towards the end of the year on the findings and also developing. And again, we really want to hear from you guys in terms of the fact sheets and what other kind of materials would be best used to communicate the findings from the situational analysis. And of course, making the reference database available. So yeah, that's kind of the plan at this stage. But yeah, really keen to engage along the way and make sure this is really fit for purpose and fulfilling the need that's there. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sam. I am going to continue on this part then. Okay, so other really interesting things that happened at COP. There was also the launch for the Global Initiative on the Taking of Migratory Species, which is GTI. The link here is to the press release for it. And that initiative is one where it's a global initiative, it's collaborative global effort under CMS, where we're bringing stakeholders together to address drivers of illegal and unsustainable taking. Its aim is to improve data and monitoring, strengthen legal and policy frameworks, enhance community engagement, raise awareness, and reduce demand before exploitation escalates. And there is more information on the press release, and I believe they have more info linked on there as well. So feel free to check that out if you are interested in it. And again, that is not limited to avian species, but to people who might be interested to about any species, because that does affect a large amount of taxa, especially in this region. So if you have any interest in non-avian taxa that might be also undertake, that might be of interest to you. And I wanted to also just mention that at the COP, our Energy Task Force had a lot of side events that covered a wide range of issues. So they had a multi-stakeholder collaboration for nature positive renewable energy that covered a lot of different tools that were coming up. So for instance, with BirdLife International, there's AV-STEP, where there is now maps that are coming out, for instance, for Bangladesh this year, I believe. And there will be more for other countries in this region that are rolling out in this year, so I would keep an eye out for that. And then there were some presentations that were also about some really interesting projects that were being done in Europe and in that were and also in other parts of the world, and also just the other side events that covered electrocution in the Mediterranean, covered bats, and that was a key through line, which I was very happy to hear also about, that there were more focus on bats for sustainable energy planning. And then from the World Coastal Forum, they really focused on strengthening cooperation for coastal connectivity. And then also just the initiative to promote more coexistence for power lines and biodiversity. So they have a wonderful website that you can find more information in general about what they do if you're interested in energy as an emergent issue in this region. I recognize that that is something that people have reached out to me about before, and it is still very new. So, reach out to Mano Sweeney if you're really interested in this topic and want to engage more with this overall. And again, some relevant information documents that may be of interest to folks. The Global Review of Direct Take of Seabirds, that is an info document that is about direct exploitation of seabirds. The MISNETS report, which we'll be hearing more about from Dingley in this meeting, that full report for that was an information document that was also for the ITTEA, and we've discussed this before, but it's linked online. I just want to highlight it again since it is a very good report and it's very relevant to future activities that we have coming up. And then also the impact of take and trade of migratory birds for consumption in Africa and Eurasia, that is on wild meat, and that is something that is relevant to folks who are interested in this topic for direct exploitation and illegal take in this region as well. So I encourage you to check out those reports. They're very informative, they're very thorough, some really good analyses in them. And I think they're very informative for many of the topics that we cover in this task force and that people are usually interested in this region. So please go check those out. They are, of course, free and ready for all of you to use. And I think that this knowledge gap thing is something we always need to fill in this region. So please share it with your colleagues and encourage them to go through and look through the information documents on the website overall and find things that they may find to be useful for them. And they also announced that the next COP, COP16, will be in Bonn, Germany in 2029. And no exact dates yet, but it will be in Bonn, Germany in 2029. So if you're interested in attending next COP, that is going to be the next host country. And I wanted to just also make sure to mention and to reiterate that there are some upcoming meetings for the ITTEA. As Sam mentioned, there's going to be a webinar that is going to occur in mid to late June that is going to present some of their and test some of their early emergent findings from the consultations that they would be going around doing with everybody on the lit review, in the interviews, and then also identify any significant gaps or inconsistencies in those early findings and, fill them in if necessary. So, please keep an eye out. We will send an invitation for that once we have the dates nailed down. And hopefully, if you are able to also contribute to their call for information and work with us here on this, I would be very appreciative. And I think everybody would love to see this come out to be a very robust and comprehensive situation analysis. I think so far, a lot of the situation analysis we've done have been very informative for people overall, and I would like to continue this trend of producing really good work. So, please engage with us, and Sam will probably pester you, I'll probably pester you, so please don't get sick of our emails. And then also please save the date for an in-person meeting that we're going to host in Bangkok in Thailand. That is going to be 19 to 21 November. It's probably gonna be a 2-day event, and the 21st will be primarily for the local Thai government officials. We are hoping to have like a half-day event for them. So for international folks, we are going to fly everybody in and do a workshop that'll be focused on how we can try to make cooperative action that can reduce the sale and use of misnets overall in this region. And I am hoping that, we will get that all through procurement soon, and I can start sending out invitation letters to everybody. But that's the date, so save the dates if you can come. I'm working right now on getting us a exact venue, and I'll hopefully be able to let all of you know once we send out the invitation letters. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second. Are there any questions from anybody on any of the topics from the updates from the Secretariat? Okay, if there are no questions. Or you can type them in chat or you can raise your hand. Either one is fine. Okay. If you have any questions that you think of that come up later, feel free to, mention it to us later. You can direct message me if you don't feel comfortable staying in the crowd and I can just read it. So yeah, I'm gonna move on then to the next agenda item to make sure we keep moving on. So I'm gonna kick it over to Ding Li to talk about the use of nets. Ding Li?
Thanks. Just 1 second. Let's pull it up. Could you see some pattern codes on your screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay. Thank you very much, Susan, for that excellent overview. My name is Ding Li, and for the next 15 minutes, I hope I'll be giving everybody here a little bit of a overview, background on bird hunting in Asia, that would build the context and the momentum for some of the later discussions on developing a monitoring tool for the kinds of actions we need to do to address illegal bird hunting in Asia. Bird hunting is not something that's new to our region. In fact, there's been quite a number of studies since the 1980s that look at bird hunting in different parts of Asia, Southeast Asia and East Asia included. And of course, to a very large extent, a lot of these studies focus on how local people's livelihoods were linked to hunting of specific bird species. Some of this is legal and some of this is not legal. But until very recently, there's been very little published information on bird hunting in different parts of Asia, except for a handful of papers that were published between the 90s to the early 2000s. Bird hunting, of course, got propelled into the bird conservation agenda again about 10 years ago, thanks to the decline of a very charismatic landbird passerine in East Asia, and this is none other than the yellow-breasted bunting. The data that is available on the yellow-breasted bunting at that point in time showed that the species had undergone a large decline across a large part of its distribution. A study which is very well known by now, look at the kinds of declines that the yellow-breasted bunting has suffered in different parts of its breeding distribution, and found that by and large, all across its distribution, the species is undergoing rapid declines. And this once again propelled the topic of bird hunting, and especially illegal bird hunting, back to the agenda. The kind of information that we know from different parts of Southeast Asia, especially South Asia and East Asia, shows that to a very large extent, the trade in wild meat on top of subsistence hunting is a major driver for the decline of many vertebrate species, birds and mammals included. And in fact, a number of conservation reviews that have been published in the last 10, 20 years highlighted hunting to be one of the most important threats to biodiversity in Southeast Asia and South Asia. And in some cases, even linked to an ecological phenomena called the empty forest syndrome, as we can see in many parts of Southeast Asia. Forests that look relatively intact but have very low densities of vertebrates in them. By and large, what we know in the last 10 years suggested that there was a need for more information. There was a need to understand the status, the situation of bird hunting, and especially illegal bird hunting in different parts of Southeast Asia. The scale of bird hunting especially. And from there onwards, how can we develop roadmaps to map the kind of conservation actions we want to address this really pressing conservation issue. At that point in the early 2017 to 2018 period, the issue also got to the EAAFP and to the CMS, and that was around the time where the CMS EAAFP Task Force of Illegal Hunting, Take and Trade of Birds was brought into discussion and eventually created. In early 2020, BirdLife International, together with some of our partners across different parts of Southeast Asia, we undertook a 2-year-long situation analysis to understand the magnitude of bird hunting in the context of Southeast Asia. We looked at species hunted, the magnitude of species hunted, and to that end, we undertook a lot of market surveys, field surveys, and also interview questionnaires with local people and other stakeholders across 11 countries of the region. Our findings were very worrying. We found that many major groups of birds were being hunted, including shorebirds, for example, rails and crickets, herons and bitterns. And what was particularly surprising to us was that there was a lot of hunting activities targeting passerine species like bulbuls, swallows, and thrushes, as you can see here. In the situation analysis, we also look at the types of tools that hunters were using in different parts of the region. And based on the close questionnaire interviews and surveys that we've done with various communities in different parts of Southeast Asia, we found that nets, inclusive of both mist nets and fishing nets, consistently emerged to be the most prevalent types of hunting tools used by hunters in this part of the world, together with a number of other tools that are designed for hunting ground birds and other groups of birds. But on top of the emerging evidence on the different tools that were being used, the different species and family groups that were affected by hunting, we were also looking into the evidence on bird hunting and illegal bird hunting in social media, which we did a number of social media searches, which led us to find that there were also a lot of information on bird hunting, demonstrating different species, different techniques being hunted on major social media platforms in different parts of Asia. A lot of those findings from the first situation analysis that was done by my team and many of my partners in different parts of Southeast Asia was presented at the EAAFP MOP in Australia several years ago. And at that MOP, there were a few really important takeaways. I think people who were participating at that MOP session agreed that there was need to continue work to measure progress in the types of actions and activities address bird hunting, developing roadmaps, but also one really important agenda item that came up from that discussion was the issue of nets, and especially mist nets, which clearly showed itself to be a very prevalent problem. The topic becomes a little more complicated because besides the fact that mist nets are used in hunting birds, mist nets are also used in other ways that are perfectly legitimate. For example, the use of nets in the context of agricultural areas to reduce losses of crops or aquaculture producers. So that brought us to another situation analysis to look more specifically into the problem of nets. How are nets, inclusive of mist nets, fishing nets, and a whole variety of others net types, how are nets a threat to wild birds in the context of Asia? There were a few specific questions that we wanted to answer through this situation analysis. Number one, why are these nets used? Number two, the question of where are mist nets most prevalent in this region? And most importantly, to what extent are wild bird populations being impacted or harmed by mist nets? But against knowing mist nets and what species are affected, we also wanted to understand the legal backdrop of how nets were regulated or managed in different parts of Asia. And to that end, we looked at the wildlife conservation legislation of about 20 countries across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. My colleagues, including Shelby, who's also here with me, Rong, some of you met her at the last EAAFP MOC. We developed an approach to basically mine the evidence on net usage in these three parts of Asia, focusing on an approach that included an online survey questionnaire targeted at technical experts, a systematic literature review, the systematic trawl of social media using some of the more popular social media platforms like YouTube. And of course, my colleague Rong Rong have at that point in time developed a database that was designed specifically to capture evidence on birds being killed in nets in different parts of the world. And this was what we found. We found a lot of new information from across Asia, some of which was quite surprising for us. We found that the net issue was more complicated than we expected. Mist nets were not the only types of nets that were used. Of course, there were other kinds of nets. Fishing nets were also very prevalent in different parts of Southeast Asia, but there were also improvised netting, including things like what we call parallel cords, flat nets, and ground nets that were designed for catching and trapping birds on the ground. Based on our questionnaire interview with experts across the region, we found certain trends and patterns of net usage in different parts of Asia. And this is what we can very broadly summarize into. Nets were used for protecting crops in many parts of Asia and also protecting aquaculture, such as fish ponds and prawn ponds in many coastal parts of Southeast Asia and East Asia. But more importantly, nets were also used to trap birds for consumption. Again, widespread problem all across Asia. More limitedly in different parts of Asia, nets were also used to trap birds for the songbird trade, as some of us would already know. The evidence that was compiled from the iNaturalist project on nets was quite nicely spread across the world. We got a lot of evidence from Africa and North America, but more importantly, we also got a lot of data points from South and Southeast Asia in total. And we could see that there's a good spread of species that are harmed by mist nets in general. The sources of nets was also looked into in our study, and we looked at where these nets were produced based on questionnaire interviews with experts who knew the problem on the ground. We found that in many instances in different parts of Asia, fishing nets were more often than not locally made, but mist nets especially were produced in factories, industrial scale factories in different parts of Asia, and then exported to nearby countries. We also found that nets were often easy to procure on various popular shopping platforms in different parts of Asia, including platforms such as Alibaba and Lazada and others. How were nets being used based on our questionnaire? We found that by and large, nets were being used not just for hunting, but also for deterrence. And in some cases, nets resulted in what I would define here in the broad sense bycatch. Basically, they killed wildlife that they were not intended to target. In summary, we found that in relation to hunting in different parts of Asia, there were also different motivations and drivers for hunting. In some parts of Asia, recreational hunting was more common than other forms of hunting. In many parts of Southeast Asia, especially, hunting for human consumption was very prevalent. But in another layer, we found that there were also a bustling industry in what we call merit release. These are basically targeted hunting for birds that were then used for releases in religious ceremonies in different parts of Asia. So some evidence that we pulled out from the social media, as some of you can see here from across different parts of Asia. As you can see, it affects a very large array of birds, and particularly in agricultural areas that are not often surveyed or studied as compared to other types of wetlands and terrestrial environments. All right. In many parts of Asia, nets were also used as deterrents to minimize what local people would perceive as bird pests. So we found that in countries such as in Bangladesh, in Thailand, in Vietnam, nets were commonly placed in croplands that were designed specifically to reduce the losses of certain crops to birds that were perceived to cause damage to these crops. What was pertinent to us was that the extent and enforcement of regulations on the use of nets is quite varied across Asia, and in many cases very ambiguous, which in a way was not conducive for enforcement. A couple of studies that we were able to extract from our work on a systematic review of the literature, we found that there were not that many studies looking into the problem of nets in different parts of Asia. So just a handful of studies, one of the largest, which was carried out some years ago in Thailand, where a systematic survey was conducted across Thailand's central plains, looking at the use of nets in the context of fish ponds and paddy fields. So in summary, some key takeaways from our situation analysis on nets. We found that nets of all types were widely used all across Asia for hunting and also for crop deterrence. The amount of mortality is significant, with more than 375 species impacted in the region that we can document, of which 211 are migratory species in the wider context of the East Asia-Australasia flyway. We found that across the region there was very limited monitoring or assessment of the impacts of nets. And one important point that we took out from our work was that there were regional patterns across across Asia, but the use of nets was most severe in Southeast Asia and some parts of China. Nets were very easily available for people who wanted to buy them. They were often very cheap and widely available, as I've mentioned earlier on. Often people could procure nets for less than $2 on online platforms. And we found that manufacturing hubs for some of these nets were concentrated into 4 countries of Asia. Some key challenges ahead from our work. The situation analysis that our team and many of our collaborators have done over the last 5 years have given us a much better understanding and picture of the issue of bird hunting in 3 parts of Asia. But more importantly, highlight shared conservation challenges. The same problems are faced in all countries of Asia, but we are confronted with major knowledge gaps in some parts of Asia, especially in Central Asia and the Middle East. With regards to enforcement and monitoring, this is another major area, a major gap area that is made complicated by the large differences in legal frameworks and legal systems across the different countries of Asia. And also noting the fact that up till now, we do not have any tools in place to monitor the kinds of action that we need to take on the ground or to measure progress to address these activities. So some key next steps for us, of course, there will be a need for further studies and fieldworks in some parts of Asia. For those of us working on the ground in different countries of Asia, there was a need to get people to participate in these forums so that we can share knowledge, experience, and build each other's capacity into how we can address the issue of missed nets as a whole. And then, of course, sharing experiences on interventions that work across different parts of of Asia. But most of all, and I think as a key takeaway from my presentation, I think we all agree that there's a need to develop a framework that would help us to monitor action on the ground. And this is really important because as much as missed nets are known and acknowledged widely by colleagues, conservation practitioners in this region to be a problem, we also need to acknowledge the fact that there's remarkably a lot of conservation actions hovering on the ground to address the problem. There have been a lot of targeted actions on the ground by our colleagues working in China and in many countries of Southeast Asia. And then there's a need for a rigorous and good way to measure and monitor these actions going forward. So I think that hopefully sets the backdrop for our next discussion on how we can work together as a community working on bird conservation and addressing the problem of net to develop and to design a monitoring tool that can help us to understand what are the gaps in actions in each part of Asia and how different kinds of activities are going forward as we progress to address illegal bird hunting across our flyway. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thanks once again to my CMS colleagues for giving us this opportunity to share our work. And we look forward to having conversations with you all during this session to gather ideas as to how we can build a robust monitoring framework to monitor these actions on the ground. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ding Li. That was definitely very informative and sets us up very well for our next presentation from Clary, who is the MIKT coordinator. And the MIKT is, of course, a much more matured task force compared to the ITTEA, and so we have a lot of lessons we can learn from them. And Clary will today talk about how the scoreboard has been a really great tool for helping them assess their progress as well. So Clary, I hand it over to you.
Can you see or not yet?
Not yet. Not yet.
No, yeah.
Yep, it's
Now?
loading. It's loading.
Okay. Is
Yep.
it okay now?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction. I'm the coordinator for the illegal killing, taking, and trade migratory birds task force for the Mediterranean. So the equivalent of the Mediterranean, and the first task force that has been created by CMS to tackle illegal taking of birds. I'm going to talk to you about the scoreboard, which is what we developed already for some years as a way to assess the progress in combating illegal killing, taking, and trade. Because the scoreboard was developed jointly by the CMS and the Bern Convention, which is a European Convention for Nature Conservation, it covers a wider area than just the Mediterranean. So it covers the Mediterranean plus Europe and the Caucasus. It was developed as a self-assessment tool, so the countries do it and score themselves. They are not scored by an independent assessor, let's say. And it was adopted in 2017. The scoreboard is based on a format developed by IQIC, which is the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime. And it was modified and simplified in order to make it simpler to use. And it's acknowledged in Resolution 1116, Rev COP 15 very soon, as soon as everything is uploaded. This is our mandate resolution. Susan mentioned it earlier. It's the one on the basis of which we have created the different task forces. And in the resolution, there is a request to the task force to collect the experience from the scoreboard and share it. So the scoreboard that we're using in the Mediterranean is available in 3 languages. The questions can be scored they can receive a numerical score from 0 to 3 in most cases. I think in one case is 0 to 5. 2 questions require the countries to upload data in Excel. And then the overall score that the countries get, either per area of questions or overall, gets also a color code to denote how good they're doing. So it can be red if it's 0 to 25, up to dark green, which is more than 75%, all going very well. One thing that is important to stress is that the multi-stakeholder approach is strongly encouraged throughout, which means that when we send the scoreboard to the countries to ask them to complete it, we strongly encourage them to bring together all the relevant stakeholders at national level in order to complete it. So they should bring together other departments from the government, the enforcers, the NGOs, anyone, the academics, anyone who is relevant. This graph shows how many times we've done the scoreboard. You can see we started in 2018, in 2020, and then 2023. 2026 is the next time we will do the scoreboard. We haven't started yet, but it's planned for later in this year. You can see that in the beginning it was every 2 years, just for the countries to get some data going. But then after the 2020, it's going to be every 3 years. That's the agreement so far. So there are 28 indicators separated in 5 different areas. One on monitoring IKB, the second on comprehensiveness of national legislation, enforcement response, which is to do with how enforcement bodies, how specialized bodies exist and work, and how much training they receive. prosecution and sentencing, and sanctions, which is to do about the effectiveness of the judicial procedures, and the prevention, which is very much to do on awareness raising and other elements like that, working with the regulated community, which at least in Europe and the Mediterranean, we tend to use this term to refer to the hunters community. And one thing to note here is that because the scoreboard was adopted in 2017, it was based on our previous work plan. And now we have a work plan that is called the Rome Strategic Plan, which is for the period 2020-2030. That means that we're still using the scoreboard, which was adopted in 2017, but with a new strategic plan. And that's why when we did the scoreboard in 2023, we felt we had to add some additional questions, which were added, but they were voluntary questions, in order to be able to cover better the reporting related to the new strategic plan. So that's something that I will come back to later. So just some results for you to know what kind of information we get from the scoreboard. In Scoreboard 23, we ran the exercise from April to July. Out of 54 countries invited, I remind you that it's together with the Bern Convention, so it covers the Mediterranean plus Europe. 25 out of 54 replied, and it was out of those, it was 13 out of 21 of Mediterranean countries, the MIKT countries, so a higher percentage of countries replying from the Mediterranean. And overall, until now, with the 3 exercises that we have done, 39 out of 54 have replied at least once. And in the Mediterranean, the MIKT countries, 20 have replied at least once out of 21 countries. And here in the map, you see the MIKT countries, the Mediterranean countries, the ones in dark green, like Greece, Malta, Italy, and Spain, have done it all 3 times, whereas Libya is the only country that has never done it in the Mediterranean. And these are some average scores for countries that have done it at least twice in 23 plus 2018 or 2020. And what this shows is for the 5 different areas of the scoreboard, the different areas that I mentioned earlier, monitoring, legislation, and so on, there is always an incremental improvement from one scoreboard to the other, which we believe is because the scoreboard does help the countries to focus in what they need to do, even if they don't have an action plan or something. It is a guide for them on what they should be doing and what they should be assessing. And it's also a way to build ownership for this action. And legislation, as mentioned by Dingley, comes out the best because the legislation is actually quite coherent across the Mediterranean and Europe. The monitoring of IKB or ITB is difficult but not impossible. So we have already quite a lot of experience of countries sharing on how they monitor illegal taking. We've seen that prevention, which is the area of awareness raising and preemptive controls and monitoring, can show improvement, and it has shown most of improvement since the last scoreboard. One thing to note here is that, especially on awareness raising, access to funding is really critical. And in the Mediterranean, at least, and in Europe, the countries in North Africa and the Middle East have less access to funding, and therefore we do see a difference in the kind of projects they can implement. And we know that NGOs play a very important role in that, which is also why I mentioned in the beginning the multi-stakeholder approach is really critical. And then the areas that get the less scores, the lowest scores, are enforcement and justice, and that's because they're very linked to investment, training, capacity building, and commitment by the countries. But also in the Mediterranean, we have some really good examples like the Wildlife Crime Academy developing to address and help and support in those areas too. One thing more to say is that since 21, so since the second scoreboard, the Bern Convention has dedicated a website where the countries give us permission to upload their raw answers to the scoreboard. And this is a table from this website. And basically, when the countries complete the scoreboard, they are also asked, are you happy to share your answers? And most of them say yes so far. So until now, 26 out of 39 have agreed to have their raw answers shared. So anyone can go and check exactly what the countries have replied in detail. So just to close, some considerations and lessons learned from the scoreboard so far. There is the issue of languages. I don't know how easy it is to address it in your region. Maybe it's not so easy, but it's something to bear in mind because it certainly increases the possibility that countries reply. Having a combination of scoring, which is relatively easy, and commentary is good practice, I think, because considering the ease of completion is important. Most of the countries will put a score to themselves, but they might not write a long commentary answer. One thing to consider is the length of your work plan and what happens with the reporting once the work plan expires. And this is what happened to us with the scoreboard and the Rome strategic plan. So building in some flexibility to allow for that is important. Insisting on the multi-stakeholder approach is really important in order to be able to have a more complete answer, because a lot of work is done by NGOs, so you need to find a way to build it in to the answer. The permission to upload raw answers is good practice to ask from the beginning if the countries are happy to give the permission, and not to try to go back afterwards, which is what happened with the first scoreboard. And then also consider if you want a CMS body to adopt the scoreboard, which one will it be? I mean, is it going to be the COP, the standing committee? With the MIKT, we chose, initially it was done at the COP, but then we changed it, not this COP, the previous one, and now it's a standing committee, which gives it a little bit more flexibility. And of course, you will need an online reporting tool. If you want to find out more about the Mediterranean scoreboard, there is a dedicated brochure on the main MIKT page. There is also a scoreboard page that has a lot more information on the history and you can find all the analysis of the different scoreboards, the 3 scoreboards until now. And I've linked here just the last one, which was also an information document in the last COP we just had in Brazil. And thank you very much. I hope I didn't take too much time. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. That was very informative. And of course, there will be differences in our region in terms of how, we are respectful of people, are very conscious about sharing information. And so if people don't want to post it online, we don't have to do that. The most important part is for you to use the tool as a way to assess your progress and use it as a guideline to make progress on that. So, focusing internally on the national level, and, we do, of course, already have multi-level stakeholders engaged in it. And so hopefully, if you're an NGO and you're working with the government, talk to your colleagues to fill them in on what's going on here if they were not able to attend the meeting tonight, and encourage them to watch this recording and go through the documents and fill in the questionnaire, which I will now hand it over to Shelby and Dingley to introduce the consultation questionnaire. And please go ahead.
Thanks, Susan, and thanks to Clary for giving that excellent overview of the MIKT scoreboard. I think for the context of the Southeast Asia scoreboard, we have an easier job to do compared to the MIKT, because we have the MIKT as the model for us to study in detail before we start brainstorming about how we should develop metrics for the Southeast Asia scoreboard. And of course, in the early days of the development of the Southeast Asia scoreboard that Shelby will present later on, we basically sliced and diced the MIKT scoreboards, looking at each indicator and then looking it against the cultural and the legal backdrop of different Southeast Asian countries. So thanks, of course, to you and your other colleagues for having created the first scoreboard that is being already actively used in the Mediterranean region and the Middle East. Using the information that we've been able to, glean from the MIKT scoreboard, we had the first round of consultation at the EAAFP MOP back in the Philippines about 4 or 5 months ago. And again, thanks to CMS colleagues for hosting that session. We were able to convene some really active group discussions whereby we got our participants, stakeholders representing different groups of stakeholders to sit together into 2 or 3 groups and brainstorm what is really needed for Southeast Asia. Going back to basics from the ground, what do we know about hunting on the ground in different countries of Southeast Asia? So Shelby and I and some of our colleagues studied those results from the EAP MOPS workshop, and we then redesigned the scoreboard that captures some of the nuances of Southeast Asia. And of course, as you've mentioned, Clary, we are working in a region that is culturally diverse, so there'll be other things that we need to consider into the scoreboard. There's a couple of topics that we have built into this scoreboard, which Shelby will go into detail later on, that are possibly, well, if that's not in the MIKT scoreboard, but of course we want to put it on the screen for people to have a look and see whether if it's workable. But what is really important also is that we wanted to consult the community of conservation practitioners, government colleagues in this call, to understand what people saw to be really important to measure in scoreboards. And this is really important for us, working on designing this scoreboard, because we want to make sure that we allocate the right amount of weightage to different metrics on the scoreboard. So later on, we will be sharing an online questionnaire for people to rate importance of different indicators on the scoreboard. So I think that's what I just wanted to weigh in before I pass the floor to Shelby. Shelby will take us through the nitty-gritties of this scoreboard. I don't think she's got all the time in the world to cover every indicator, but we'll talk through some of the more important indicators and how we can measure it. So on that note, I'll pass the floor to Shelby. Over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Dingley. Hi everyone, my name is Shelby and I'm the Asia Conservation Officer at BirdLife International. So today I'll be giving an overview of the draft scoreboard to assess action on illegal bird hunting in Southeast Asia. This first draft of the scoreboard has been put together by a team of us at BirdLife International, but with really helpful and important inputs from regional experts, which was collected at the last ITTEA meeting before the EAAFP MOP 12, which was held in Cebu last year in November. Before I dive into the details of the scoreboard, just wanted to provide a brief background on bird hunting in Southeast Asia. As elaborated by my colleague Dingley just now, hunting in Southeast Asia is socially motivated, culturally motivated, and economically motivated. And the actions taken to address hunting in this region is equally or even more diverse. And in many countries, it would target the drivers of trade or drivers of hunting present in the local context. And this is where a scoreboard comes into play as a really helpful tool to assess action on illegal bird hunting in Southeast Asia, because it represents a consolidated template which can be applied across the diverse contexts in this region. And what we have done is to first use the MIKT scoreboard as a base to develop the Southeast Asian scoreboard from, but to also understand how we can contextualize the scoreboard to the Southeast Asian context. We held that first consultation during the second joint meeting of the ITTEA during EAAFP Mock 12. During this meeting, we had regional experts present who helped us to identify key metrics to measure and assess, and they also ranked the importance of these metrics. So you can see in the picture on the right, this is one of the outputs of a group discussion, and it shows the different categories of metrics that participants came up with, and there are various rankings on how important they were to measure and include in a Southeast Asian scoreboard. After this meeting, we then came back and worked on the MIKT scoreboard, then contextualize it to the Southeast Asia region. In particular, what we aimed to do in that process was to ensure that the indicators were relevant and were able to be applied broadly across this region. We wanted to recognize regulated hunting practices for indigenous people and local communities in Southeast Asia, and this was a factor that our regional experts really highlighted during the consultation. And lastly, we wanted to weight the scoreboard criteria to emphasize key areas for action. And I'll provide more specific examples shortly. And so a brief overview of our draft Southeast Asian scoreboard. We have kept the 5 themes that were present in the MIKT scoreboard. I think the wording is actually almost very similar. But the number of indicators that we have in our Southeast Asian scoreboard is fewer. We have 25 indicators that got present to 28 in the MIKT one. The reason is we actually removed the questions on providing data just because we felt that perhaps it was more feasible to have indicators with scoring criteria rather than ask for data in the Southeast Asian context. We've also changed the wording of some of this criteria a little bit, and I'll go over a few examples later on. Before I jump into the examples, we also changed the scoring range from 0 to 3 to 0 to 5. And in most cases, our indicators use a scoring range of 0 to 5. However, there are some which use a smaller scoring range of 0 to 3 or 0 to 4. And that's how we are implicitly weighting the different indicators to emphasize action in certain areas over others. So I'll be going over each theme and giving you a sense of the criteria, the indicators that are written under each theme. However, again, with the time limit, I wouldn't be able to go into specific detail of each individual indicator, but I'll be pulling out an example under each theme to give everyone a sense of how we have structured the questions and the scoring criteria that we've used. So with the first theme, this is focused on national monitoring of bird hunting status and extent. And this includes three indicators covering the status of illegal bird hunting, the species which are affected by illegal bird hunting, and the geographical hotspots of bird hunting. These 3 indicators were highlighted during our consultation, and it was clear from us, from the outputs of that consultation, that this was a really important thing to keep and emphasize during our scoreboard. So one example of an indicator that we've used is geographical hotspots of bird hunting. It's in our scoreboard is ranked from 0 to 5, with 5 being the most comprehensive and 0 being that there's no national list or map of geographical hotspots available in the country. How we've expanded on this indicator a little bit is to not only look at the availability of data or the quality of data, but to also look at whether the data is current or outdated. So for example, to score the maximum points of 5, a country will need to have an updated map, at least a current map that was made within the last 5 years. That's fully based on quantitative data from official and comprehensive bird hunting statistics, and are obtained through a standardized, repeatable monitoring framework. Moving on to the second theme, this theme B is on the comprehensiveness of national legislation, and there are 8 indicators that go under this theme. I will be pulling out 2 examples to show how we have done the weighting in this scoreboard. First, looking at indicator number 3 on prohibitions on bird and wildlife hunting under national legislation. This indicator is quite straightforward. It measures how comprehensive is the national legislation on prohibitions. And of course, to score the full mark of 5, a national legislation would need to have a very comprehensive list of prohibitions in comparison to 0, where national legislation would not have the following, would not prohibit the following activities. Now, this indicator is in contrast to the next one on exceptions and exemptions under national legislation. As you can see, the scoring range for this indicator is just from 0 to 3, whereas the previous indicator had a range of 0 to 5. And that's because while we acknowledge and recognize that it's important that exceptions and exemptions are comprehensively managed and stringently regulated, we also want to emphasize action on ensuring that prohibitions, which are covered under indicator 3, are comprehensively covered in law. In that way, for a country's self-assessment to improve, if they have already achieved the maximum score under indicator 4, investing in improving national legislation on bird hunting and wildlife hunting prohibitions could actually take their score higher because of the larger scoring range and larger maximum score. So this is just one example of how we have done the weighting. And later on, my colleague Ting will be going over, briefly introducing a questionnaire, which we are rolling out to understand the relative importance of these different indicators, which will help us, which will inform and guide our decision on weighting the different scoring indicators. Moving on to theme C, this theme is all about enforcement response, and there are 5 indicators. In our consultation at the EAAFP MOC, participants actually highlighted indicator number 5 on technical training for enforcement agencies as a really important indicator that they wanted to see included and highlighted in the scoreboard. And so what we've done is to expand on this indicator a little bit. It not only measures whether enforcement agencies are familiar with wildlife crime, but does this based on assessments like tests or examinations. And this was brought up during the consultation as well, that it's important to assess not only whether enforcement agencies have received the training, but whether they have they've retained that training and are able to implement it in their work. We've also included the development of technical training programs as part of this scoring criteria and the extent of implementation of these programs. Under theme D, this theme is all about prosecution and sentencing, and there are 4 indicators contributing to this theme. We actually added one indicator which was not originally present in the MIKT scoreboard about the transparency of prosecution outcomes. And this is because we acknowledge that the transparency of prosecution outcomes can actually act as a deterrent for future wildlife crime. And this is scored in a range of 0 to 4, with 4 being the most comprehensive scoring and 0 being that prosecution sentencing outcomes are not publicized and never documented in a publicly accessible record. Lastly, this is the final theme. The scoreboard is on prevention. And this involves 5 indicators, including international cooperation, initiatives to address drivers of wildlife crimes, demand reduction, awareness of the regulated community, and indigenous awareness. The reason why the last 2 are optional, especially for the last one, indigenous awareness, is because we recognize the importance of including assessments of Indigenous involvement and awareness in our scoreboard. This was highlighted during the consultation as well. However, not all countries would have significant populations of Indigenous people, and therefore this criteria may or may not be applicable to some of the countries doing the self-assessment, and that's why we've made it optional. Just to give you a sense of how we have worded the indicator on Indigenous awareness, to attain a maximum score of 3, countries would have to have well-developed and up-to-date awareness-raising materials, which are locally implemented by both government bodies or NGOs in collaboration with Indigenous representatives, and to have national communication strategies which account for Indigenous perspectives. In that we are trying to include this Indigenous representation, which was highlighted as a major metric to measure in our consultation into this scoreboard. So moving forward, what we need to do with as a next step is to collate inputs from the ITTEA and EAAFP ITB task forces to understand what experts find on the relative importance of the indicators. Meaning, with that information, we're able to understand how to balance the scoring criteria as well as the weighting. We'll then tweak the scoreboard according to the inputs that we get, and then share this scoreboard with CMS for further comments and edits. So I will now pass on the time to Ding Li, who can bring everyone through this questionnaire. But if you have any questions, any feedback, please feel free to contact myself or Ding Li, and we'll be very happy to have your inputs and include them into the scoreboard. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelby. So the questionnaire is in the chat. Some of you will have seen it in the link earlier on. So maybe if you could repost the link again, that'd be great, Shelby. So that it brings it up. Yeah. The questionnaire is to help us to size up each metric, each indicator really. Because the scoreboard, the way it stands right now, it is a straw man scoreboard. So we have gathered a lot of information. We have studied and dissected the MIKT and now reconstituted it into a new scoreboard with new indicators, but there will be other indicators that are in the MIKT that is not reflected in the Southeast Asia scoreboard. I think it will be good, of course, for us to understand two things: the relative importance of each indicator, recognizing the fact that the legal and the cultural context in each Southeast Asian country will be different. Some of these indicators will be easy to measure, relatively easy to measure, because we would have all the information in government agencies and in civil society and organizations like NGOs. There'll be indicators that are either very hard to measure without spending a lot of money and resources to collect that kind of information and talking across different government agencies, or simply too difficult to carry out. So the questionnaire is here to help us understand. I think there's no one-size-fits-all scoreboard in the end, but I think it's also good for us to understand from the conservation community and also from enforcement colleagues in the region to give us a better sensing of what is most relevant to your country or region. Ultimately, the scoreboard has got optional components that can be brought out for measurement, and they are designed for self-assessment. So it is hoped that the scoreboard will be used by colleagues to guide development of workshops at the national level or at the sub-national level to assess where are we today with the kinds of actions that we have implemented on the ground to address bird hunting. Where were we 2 years ago? How have things changed, and how should we design things going forward? So some kind of roadmap mapping. So that hopefully gives people a better context of why we are putting together this questionnaire. This questionnaire is to help us to assess from your point of view the relative importance of each indicator, and the feasibility of bringing the information together to assess against each of these indicators. And that will help us to weigh indicators appropriately in response to the general understanding and perception of these indicators in each of the Southeast Asian countries. So I think the link is already in the chat, and there's probably a bit of time to put out a few questions. So I should hand the floor back to Susan to see if there's any questions from the floor so that we can answer or discuss them at length. Over to you, Susan.
Yeah, so I encourage everybody to click on that link and go through that. And again, I don't know if Dingley will emphasize the first question about your country is optional. So you can, if you do not feel comfortable divulging where you were from and you just want to answer the questions, you can skip that first question and dive right into the more required questions to evaluate the different sections of the questionnaire. And this form, please take this link and also share it with your other colleagues who may have input for us. I will send a follow-up email with it as well in order to remind everybody that you can take the questionnaire later. We will make a document version that we can also upload to the meeting website if your colleagues prefer to fill one out by hand and send it back to us. Whatever is the preferred method for us to get some input, I think we would appreciate that. As you click through the questionnaire, if there are any aspects of it that may be confusing, please feel free to ask questions, and we will make note of that and provide more clarification and also be able to edit the actual scoreboard to be clear on that. And hopefully also, with the kinds of questions that you bring up, we can then maybe provide some examples in the guidance document that will address those kinds of issues that may come up a lot from colleagues, for instance.
I just want to mention one thing, disclaimer, is that at no point in the questionnaire do you need to write stuff. They are only numerical ratings. So it's really easy to fill up. We simulated it internally and it took us about not more than 10 minutes. So you just have to read through it and put a number. That's all.
Yeah, this is not about the actual rating, by the way. Again, reiterate, it's just about how important do you think it is for the overall scoreboard and the overall sense of it. So you're not answering anything about your countries in particular, it's just about for the scoreboard. And Larry has asked to know what all the questions are in advance, to not to click through it. It's the different themes that Shelby went through, and so as you click through it, it's going to be the different sections and themes and just indicate and score whatever the level of importance you think each of those are. So it's, again, not to answer specifically about your country right now, just about the level of importance you think it is. And that's why Shelby walked us through the general themes before in the overview. If there is feedback for any of it, if there is clarification needed, please feel free to let us know, and Shelby and Dingley will make edits accordingly. Are there any particular questions that come up or come to mind as people go through it? Because I know some of us were present for the discussion during the pre-mock, but not everybody was. And so, we do appreciate that if you think of certain things that may or may not be as useful, or you think that it doesn't actually get at the point, if you were at the pre-mock, it doesn't get at the point that you were trying to raise in that group and you want to subtly retool some of those, and you want to provide suggestions, we are very open to them. And if you want to just privately send that to us or talk or put it in chat, that's also perfectly fine. And you can give us feedback later after you've had a chance to read through them. Like I said, I will put we'll put a more comprehensive document version that you can read through also. And then that's all going to be on the meeting website along with every single presentation you saw today. So you can always go back and refer to that information later on and talk to your other colleagues about it. Naya asked, when would you like this feedback by? If you could please provide the feedback to us within the next 2 weeks, I would say, before May 1st, let's say. How about that? And that'll give Dingley and Shelby enough time to go through all the feedback from everybody and be able to incorporate that into a guidance document appropriately. And I think that that's something that, the Google form is very easy to fill out, but of course, we have other colleagues who may not be able to attend this meeting, and we do still appreciate their feedback. So if you do have a large network of people who you work with on this issue that would provide valuable feedback, we do appreciate if you could share this with them. And, again, the document version will be also online. You can just email it to them even. So give them a little context and ask them for their feedback on what their thoughts are for that. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Susan, could I just jump in with one small intervention? I think for friends in Southeast Asia, I think it'd be useful to think also about other initiatives in your country, in your region, to address illegal hunting, not necessarily of birds. There's quite a few initiatives in this region looking at bushmeat hunting. And of course, Southeast Asia is very rich in large mammals, so there are quite a number of other initiative programs and projects that are looking into the hunting of ungulates. I think it will be useful to think about how synergies can be forged across different initiatives as well, because it
Yeah.
is well likely that the scoreboards will be used by government agencies and NGOs working across a breadth of different hunting issues in this
Yeah.
region. So
Yeah.
it's not a bird-only issue. It affects mammals, it affects reptiles. Bushmeat hunting targeting specific mammals is quite widespread in this
Yeah.
region, and
Yeah.
there's quite a bit of work that has looked into that
Yeah.
aspect of hunting. Yeah.
And actually, if you need more inspiration for something much more developed in terms of national reporting, you can look at all the CITES Ivory national action plans and reporting, because that's a very developed tool that most agencies are very familiar with because they've worked with CITES for so long. And a lot of the countries report back for the Ivory Action Plan, for instance. And so that's something you can look to as like a reference for what do people usually report on for these kinds of reports if you are a little stumped. And CITES there are aspects of it that are very similar for this particular issue for CMS. And so if you do want to look at some of the reporting that they do on a national level, scoreboards that they have for that, there are more folks in your government offices that may be more familiar with CITES, and so they might have ideas for those that are applicable in this case, in this region. And so you can always remind your colleagues that there are actually things that they've done very similar to this already in their offices, and that's still applicable here, but with a more specific focus for migratory birds. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lee and Shelby. And please, everybody, take your time to go through that when you have a chance, and then we'll send this around again also. Are there any other parting words, Dingley and Shelby, that you would like to put about the questionnaire? And
I think it's important to be very upfront about what information is easily available or can be mobilized for Susan. So while we were, crafting the text for each of the indicators, and we ask ourselves, is it easy if I was in the government department to find this information? Which agency shall I talk to get this information? And are there sensitivities? Are there impediments for interagency discussions and collaborations? These are real challenges that enforcement agencies will face on the ground. So I think we need to be upfront on how feasible, I was use the word feasible, we can get hold of some information. If it's entirely unfeasible, I think we need to be upfront that, okay, I think this indicator does not work in my country in Southeast Asia. We should either have very low weightage for it or entirely remove it. On the other hand, there will be other indicators that are much easier to manage and measure. For example, wider initiatives to address hunting, initiatives to work with indigenous communities, which are present in every single Southeast Asian country. I think there could be a few, well, you could call them low-hanging fruits among the indicators to be measured. So I think as conservationists working on the ground who knows what's going on in Myanmar, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Malaysia, I think it's very important for us to be upfront on the kinds of information that we can pull out for assessment against the monitoring tool.
yeah, and actually that kind of underlines, a lot of colleagues who are attending, especially from NGOs and local communities, they might feel more comfortable responding specifically for just where they're from, and that's perfectly okay. And if you want to specify that in certain ways, if you want us to retool the language so that you feel that it encompasses that a little better or allows you to like select an option where you're answering for a national level or a subnational level in some way, we can also have that as one of the early background questions, and then you can view it in the context of that particular geographic scale. That if that encourages you to have more folks who are engaging with it, I think that's perfectly fine because I do know there are definitely a lot more, you know, non non-standard ways that people organize themselves in governmental units that sometimes, they will report back in. So yeah. And Kyle had a question, just wondering if this has been shared with the ASEAN WEN and ASEAN WG CITES and WE. I've been trying to email them multiple times for many years, and if you can get them to respond to emails from you to do stuff, that'd be great. Please share this with them so that they will actually engage with us more.
Yeah, I think Susan, just to address one more comment. I think this is coming from Carl from the EAAFP
Yes.
with regards to CITES. So just in case you thought we were also thinking only about migratory birds, my team, my department, we are also looking at the songbird trade. So the songbird trade is part of the bigger picture.
Yes.
Shelby, for example, leads our work on the pet trade, the songbird trade in Southeast Asia. So
Yes.
some of the knowledge that we have gleaned from the sale of some of the most popular songbird species in Southeast Asia has also been factored into the thinking underpinning the monitoring indicators. Yeah.
Yes, and there's definitely more market survey data that exists already for songbirds too, from which we can take many good lessons for how we address migratory birds as well, especially since it applies to a lot more endemics that people have more familiarity with working with sometimes also.
Yeah, but I think Kyle posed a really good point. Yeah, we should reach out to our ASEAN colleagues to gather a few more ideas on how to mold the framework into eventually an assessment tool that works for everybody.
Yes. Kyle, if you can, please.
Susan, yeah,
Yes.
sorry, I can't find the raise function. Maybe just to share some context, when I was in ACB, I had to present the activities or updates of the ASEAN Flyway Network to ASEAN Working Group on CITES and Wildlife Enforcement. I'm pretty sure they're still doing it because it's a sort of a requirement for ACB to report to all those working groups. Let me investigate this further, and
Please do,
especially
yes.
with Singapore, because Singapore, as you know, is very active on CITES. So
Yes.
let's see if I can get some information and the best way to connect with them, because they are very much active in this space. And as also we have very different focal points and ASEAN working groups and also ASEAN Flyway Network. I think AFN and AFP has the same focal points, but the rest of these groups have different focal points. The only time we actually intersect or we connect is through all those ASEAN regional meetings that we normally do when I was there. So let me investigate this further.
Yes, if you could help kind of up our priority to ASEAN WEN, that would be great. I think they have very low awareness in general of CMS, and so they are not super responsive currently sometimes to when I reach out to them. And I understand that some of that has to do with they have low human capacity to answer every single request they're given. But yes, if you could please get them to be engaging with us more, that'd be really great. Thank you.
Yeah. I think also to add on to Susan's point, this ultimately is designed to be a self-assessment tool.
Yes.
So there's no framework in place for us to compare countries, because the cultural, socio-economic context of each of our regional countries are quite different. It makes sense for us to compare ourselves against ourselves in 5 years' time and in 10 years' time.
Yeah, and we're not going to publicly share them. It's not the same as Europe in that sense. I will probably ask to see them. I will probably check in if you want suggestions on things and help work on things, help us think of project ideas, for instance. But these are especially tools that are for yourselves to look upon how you can make progress on the issue. So think about it in the context of the staff that you're working with, the local folks that you're working with, the communities that you're working with, and how responsive they can be to the issue. And look at it as a way to help guide the actions that you have going forward. And I don't want to keep us too over time. I thank everybody very much today for attending and all the great input and presentations and discussion that we've had. And thank you very much to all our speakers today. And Mark, do you have any closing words?
No, well, no, I just wanted to also thank all of the the speakers today. I think it was a really informative meeting, and we've made so much progress since we first established, all those years ago. I think it's just so good to see so much activity through CMS and BirdLife International. I mean, it's just really good. So I'm really keen to stay involved and see further progress up until COP16 in 2029 in Bonn. And I just wanted to ask you, Susan, about future plans for the year. Do you have any ideas about when we might meet again? Any webinars that we could do over the next few months, or towards the end of the year?
Yes, so like I mentioned in the upcoming ITTEA activities, I will reiterate that we have the situation analysis webinar mid to late June. We'll give you the exact date and send the invitations around. And then we will have, as I said, save the date already for the in-person MISNETS workshop in Bangkok from 19 to 21 Thailand. And I will properly send out invitations once we have the venue completely settled in, which will be quite soon since we have made much progress in terms of our planning ready for that. And hopefully once this is completed and everybody is happy with it, maybe we'll do a brief little overview, like a quick webinar, just to kind of go over and, maybe filling one out, for instance, as like an example. So if that would help everybody to encourage them to actually engage with it, I'm perfectly happy to host a sequel to this thing. Yes, and there, as Dingley mentioned, there's an ornithological conference in Singapore in November also. That would be actually before when we're doing the MISNETS workshop. And so if organize a little event there, I'd be really happy to help with that also. So yeah, if there are any other suggestions, please let us know.
Susan, just to add on to the event in November, it's going to happen on the second week of November, and BirdLife and our Mongolian partner, we have put in a proposal for a symposium that looks at flyway science and action. So it's not confirmed yet. It's not approved. But once it is, I do believe that there's a channel for us to promote some of the work that we have done on bird hunting. And there's a very high chance that my counterparts from Thailand will be also in town. So hopefully they can present some of this work again in the rundown to the event in Bangkok.
Hey, it's a short hop and a cheap flight for us to fly people from Singapore to Thailand, so it's not really that, unlikely for everybody who goes to the ornithological conference to come over to Bangkok afterwards. So, if there are folks that are going to be there that are interested, then yeah, I'm perfectly happy to have them and join us for that. Oh, and the Flyway Science Symposium in China is around late November. Hopefully later in November, not in this weird middle late part of November then. We will find out exact dates and figure it out. Everybody wants to have their events in November before everybody goes on vacation in December. We'll work it out. These are the dates we've set in mind for now, and I'm pretty sure we can make it work. But thank you again, everybody, for coming today. I appreciate all of you engaging with us, and you will be able to find everything that we talked about today on the meeting website. And this is recorded, so please encourage your colleagues to go watch it. It'll be linked on the meeting website as well. And if you have any questions and follow-up thoughts that you would like to send to me, Dingley, Clary, or Shelby, anybody, or Sam, anybody who talked today, then please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop recording right now. And also, good night, everybody. It is 3:30 a.m. here in New York, so good night.